Hello and welcome to PRCA's podcast Fuse, the global podcast for PR, marketing and communication professionals. Our special guest today is Emma Woollcott. Welcome, Emma.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Now, a little bit about Emma. So Emma is the partner in Mishcon Private and Head of Reputation Protection and Crisis Management Group. She advises high net worth individuals and organizations of all sizes on defamation, breach of confidence, invasion of privacy, harassment and data protection concerns. She regularly trains journalists, PRs and other professional advisors on publication law and advises pre and post publication, often in times of crisis. Recognized as outstanding in her field by Spears Wealth Management Index for Reputation Protection Lawyers and shortlisted as Spears Reputation Lawyer of the Year, Emma is described as a trusted advisor in Chambers and Partners and the Legal 500. I myself have worked with Emma and have known her over the years, and I'm absolutely blown away by Emma and her team. And a lot of what she does is such a critical area in this time of multipolar interests, resulting in lots of geopolitical shifts, resulting in lots of perpetual crisis. So crisis is very much becoming the norm for PR people, and actually listening to a leader who is ahead of the game is incredibly interesting and relevant for PR professionals.
You're so kind, thank you.
Emma, we would love to know a little bit about your working day. I have been so impressed in the past working with you, where you are just on it 24/7. And I just want to know, do you work incredibly long hours? What does your typical work day look like?
I spend most of my working day rewriting my to-do list because much of my work, despite the planning, tends to be quite reactive. I can be working for 5-10 clients in any one day. Wow. Normally I know what meetings I have and I'm planning the drafting and editing around it. But this area of work tends to be characterized by things popping up that are unexpected. So we have to be quite agile and responsive. There are times when work feels very intense, emotionally and intellectually. Yeah. And there are times when there feels more flexibility. I do lean into. I might make sure I rest when I can, but I love my job. I get energy from it, and I have a really good and clever team. So I lean on them quite hard. So I feel very lucky.
And like a lot of PR people, you are obviously constantly horizon scanning, looking at what's running in the news. How do you consume your news?
Constantly. I wake up, put the Today programme on. I will skim the headlines on the way in. I listen to all the kind of favourite podcasts. I love the news agents. I love newscast. So it's little and often, less social, more of the newspapers, but I kind of dip in all the day. I love to know when things are broken.
Yeah. And, the Japanese, they have a concept for purpose called ikigai. Would you say that you have a mission in life that your career enables you to fulfill?
I'm a middle child, and I think I was always obsessed with what was fair and what was just. And I can split a biscuit into 3 really accurately. So I think I've always been motivated by that sense of justice and fairness and making sure that things are as equal as they can be.
Yeah. And and so going back right to the beginning, you studied at Cambridge University and you chose to pursue law. What was it about the profession and the subject that pulled your sort of threads of curiosity?
I'm not sure when I studied law I'd really given much thought to the profession. I didn't know any lawyers. I didn't have kind of the profession in mind as much as the academic pursuit of law. So I was really fascinated by rules and why we have them and what we seek to achieve by them and whether they achieve the aim. So it was the academic rigor of jurisprudence. I wasn't as informed as I might have been about where it would take me. I just wanted to understand the experience of thinking about how humans try to control behaviours and outcomes.
So after studying law at Cambridge, you spent a couple of years working in a law firm, then another one, and then third time lucky, Mishcon came your way, and you've been working there for a good 16 years. What is it about Mishcon that anchored you and became a home for you to grow and develop?
It was very much about the culture, very much around finding a home. So I trained at a Magic Circle firm. It was great training. I had huge opportunities there. I sat with a judge and spent a term asking impertinent questions and sitting in the courtroom and watching justice be delivered. I had a secondment to Prague, so it was the training contract was afforded opportunities, but the firm was massive and the area of law wasn't really for me. And I lived for an email that landed on 4 o'clock on a Friday that was focused on defamation, privacy, and PCC as it was, complaints. And I was really fascinated by that friction between freedom of expression and the right to protect a family life, a private life. And I just knew at the end of my training contract that the firm wasn't for me, but that was the area in which I wanted to specialise. I spent 2 years at another firm, which the practice was mainly defendant focused, so acting for newspapers. I suppose I was a kind of frustrated journalism. Journalist. I believe in the power of the news to inform, and I believe in good journalism, holding power to account. So I knew I wanted to work in this area. And I came to Mishcon 16 years ago. I must have been very, very young, because it would seem to me to be, and it is, a firm that is built on strong values and a real sense of doing the work that matters, championing the underdog, caring about pursuing what's right, taking the cases that others might not want to or not be able to. And I love that drive. I love the dynamism of the firm and the fact that we've been moving and growing at pace. And there's an energy and a kind of compassion within the firm. It's very much the culture that attracted me and has kept me here.
So Emma, going to Oxbridge and then, law firms such as Mishcon, and then working for, quite posh clients who are high net worths, and really operating in these very rarefied circles. Your background, you came from a working class background. How did you overcome what a lot of people suffer, sort of imposter syndrome and, and a sense of awkwardness, for those people who are listening, who also come from, from a working class background, and they find themselves in these environments where they feel different? What advice would you give them, and what helped you during your years?
Oddly, I don't think I noticed the discrepancy. I don't think I felt as different arriving in Cambridge as I did. I don't feel that my background had as much of an impact at the beginning of my career as it has in recent years. So Cambridge is about clever. I got there from a comprehensive because I worked really hard and I've top of my game. I was academically motivated, and what the hierarchies at Cambridge are all around, how well you can pick apart the arguments, and you sit there with the guy that wrote the book, and it was predominantly the guy that wrote the book, and so at Cambridge I didn't notice that kind of discrepancy as much. Even when I started out in law, you're a good trainee if you're diligent. You're a good trainee if you're a bit of a prefect. But I think as I've kind of grown up and my job has changed, I moved away from drafting and research and analysis into client development, client winning, selling, networking, connecting. Suddenly it's around who you know, how you impress them, how you connect, and I became more aware of the difference in my background as I kind of advanced in my career. And people were like, "Oh, what school did you go to?" And I think, well, that's weird. Why would they not know about Raspberry? Or why are they asking me that? So it's become more noticeable, the kind of the privilege or the lack of privilege as I've kind of gone, as my role has changed. What advice would I give? I think don't try and be anyone you're not, and realize that whatever experience you have, it has taught you things that are different. So I am more resilient because of my background. I'm more agile, I'm more creative, or I've had more opportunities to have to pick myself up and restart. And not that anyone with privilege doesn't necessarily have those, but rather than think in any way you should try and hide who you are, I think it's really important to try and reflect on what you've learned from your experiences and what they offer you.
Yeah, and I think you're right, to lean into it. And also, I've had a bit of a mixed background, and it sort of made me have quite a sort of heightened awareness. So when I'm in the room, I'm much more conscious of invisible dynamics.
Oh,
Um,
definitely.
when you have outsider status, I think that instead of, talking about, where it can hinder, I think a lot of people's experiences, actually, there's always a silver lining.
Oh no,
And
definitely. So I was a queer teenager watching, sitting on the outside, thinking, and the observation and the focus was about not being found out, being able to be accepted. When actually now I think those same skills of waiting and observing are really useful because I spend my time thinking, what are the priorities of the people here? How what are they concerned about? How are they feeling vulnerable? My practice is all around scrutiny and injustice and people being attacked for who they are or what they've done or what they've failed to do. And the more attuned you are to actually what the real priorities are and what the agenda is, the more effective you can be. So I think that being an outsider or being slightly different means that I'm more practiced at responding and being a bit of a chameleon, bending slightly to find a point of connection, work out what you have in common with someone, rather than just focusing on how different you are. So that kind of practice started quite early.
yeah, I think it's fascinating how the early part of your career is very focused on sort of technical proficiency. And then as you start sort of going up into management and business development and being the sort of the rainmaker, it starts moving into how to build relational capital. And then that's where actually it's very much about self-awareness as well as awareness of others and a great sort of deal of psychology in order to sort of navigate those networks, which I think is
Definitely.
fascinating.
You asked about imposter syndrome earlier on. I remember a period of my professional career when that felt very, very acute. I returned from maternity leave and I was worried about the muscle memory and how I would remember the day job. And I remember feeling much more confident in the room doing the work. As soon as there was a problem on the table in front, I could roll up my sleeves, I could pick it apart. But I remember finding it very, very difficult to get the client from the lounge to the room because that chit chat, that, where have you come from, that felt really awkward because I had been, absorbed in the intricacies of, keeping a child alive the whole time. And I think that confidence of the banal chit chat is was something I always struggled with actually. And I think that if you go to private school or if you grow up in situations of greater privilege, there is more exposure to that sort of socializing. I hadn't really been in an office until I did work experience as a trainee solicitor. So it was so this is something I felt a little bit behind on. And I remember, particularly when I came back from maternity leave, thinking if I only could just meet them in the office and in the room and do the work,
Yeah.
because the other aspects of my job were so much more challenging.
Yeah, God. And you've been celebrated in the Pride Power List, the Telegraph's LGBT top 50 executives, and you've obviously founded the Mishcon's Pride Network that was set up to sponsor the firm sponsorship of Pink Law and pro bono legal advice for the community. Is part of the reason why you feel at home at Mishcon is because it has allowed you to actually, set up these incredible initiatives within the law firm, so that, and people sort of talk about, oh, bring your whole self to work, but I think it's a difference between bringing your whole self to work, but also giving you the ability to be able to, set up these pro bono initiatives in communities that you're passionate for and that's underrepresented.
Essentially, you said have Mishcon allowed me to be myself. They expected it from day one.
Yeah.
So I was kind of in and out of the closet when I was a trainee, and I tried to squeeze myself back in after law school, and that was impossible because I had been told, "Oh, you don't want to be the lesbian trainee. It's not, you'll stand out."
Wow.
I think they thought you're different enough. And so, but I arrived at Mishcon, and within days, a very senior partner said, "Oh, what do you do to serve your community?" I was like, oh. So I had been doing pro bono work throughout, and I feel like lawyers have a big role to play in contributing to society, and so I was kind of writing consultation documents for charities kind of around the edges at my desk in the evenings and things, because they who else was going to do them, and I didn't appreciate that those were part of business development, that they were part of building a practice. And the fact that I had this very senior partner saying, "How are you building a practice? What are you doing for your community?" A lot of my practice has come from my community. This is legit. I was like, oh my god, it's not just you accept me as who I am and I'm tolerated. It's like I am expected to serve and to speak to a community that others can't. And that I realized that it was seen as a positive, that I do have access to different rooms and different audiences because of who I know and who I am, and how and there is always, I think, a level of understanding and acceptance when someone has a shared experience. And so the fact that the senior partner was like, "What are you doing to serve your community? Come on, this is expected of you." I was like, "Excellent, how wonderful!" So this is what I'm doing, and actually, the LGBT community have been hugely generous to me. You know, the work that I've done pro bono has been paid back in spades. It wasn't meant to be quite so transactional, but um, I think we all try to help people that we are in tune with and fond of, and the more you are generous, the more it kind of yields return. So by the time I made my partnership application, I'm sure about a third of my origination, my new business, had come from the LGBT community.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. It's just incredible, the power of community. Now, obviously, I've had the good fortune of working with you, and absolutely in awe. When I first started working with reputation lawyers, I was just like, wow, these people, they are so on it. But I saw a lot of similarities as well as differences, because ultimately lawyers and PRs are in the spectrum of advocates. So we all work in the sort of sphere of advocacy, but obviously lawyers work within the parameters of the legal framework, whereas we work in the sort of the court of public opinion. And of course, there's an overlap. And what I'd love for you to explain for our audience is, first of all, for those who haven't worked with reputation lawyers, what is the role of a reputation lawyer? How do reputation lawyers and PR people work together? And how to also optimize working between lawyers and PRs, because also one's been in situations where actually, one didn't understand the other. So for the audience that's listening, what advice would you give PR people on how to work with lawyers, the distinction between them, what happens in a crisis? Because of course in a crisis, that's where egos sort of set up, and then you're trying to manage all these multitude of professional service experts in the eye of a storm. So yeah, I'd love to learn from you.
There's a lot of questions in that. So, reputation lawyers advise on the merits of litigation, claims in defamation, privacy. What we're used to doing is considering whether a journalist has enough information to publish a story, a credible story, and whether they've done enough to avail themselves of the defences they would seek to rely on if they were sued in defamation. So there is a huge overlap between what PRs and comms professionals do and advise on. But there's quite a big distinction. So lawyers tend to be advising on the legal merits of claims, but also the wider strategy. We've been in and around crisis situations so long that we're used to seeing the kind of the arc of a crisis and how things develop. In most matters that we advise on, there is a comms role. Sometimes it's the business's internal team, sometimes it's the incumbent agency, sometimes it's specialists that come in just for that crisis. And in all those situations, our goal is to be to make things as streamlined as possible and to try and dispense with the ego, and to also appreciate that there are different skills and different perspectives. It tends to be that PR and comms professionals are the experts in the industry and know the client very well. They tend to have been advising a client before a crisis situation occurs, whereas we tend to come in later in the day, and we are focusing on whether a particular story is going to be published and on what basis and on what evidence, and whether there are opportunities to move the story, improve the story, mitigate its impact, stop it altogether. And so we are very reliant on the inside information that the PR firm or the internal comms team have. So we're quite used to being quite kind of like direct and asking lots of questions, and then trying to work out how a consistent messaging can be deployed to different audiences. It may very well be that what's called for are quite terse exchanges with journalists to deter them from publishing or from giving certain sources too much credibility. It may very well be that actually what would work better is communications between law firms and editors or internal or media legal teams. Often similar messages are deployed through the PR conversation, the comms thing. And one of the things that we find most effective is trying to put the ego at the door and say, how are we going to work together to ensure that there's consistency in messaging and it's authentic and it's credible, but that we use our kind of combined might to be most effective. We tend to kind of find firms and PR teams as we take them as we find them, and be additive rather than obstructive. I think people sometimes think that lawyers are all abrasive and scary, and we only are called in to write angry letters or to try and prevent publication. But that's actually impossible and or not always the most sensible or likely outcome. So it's about trying to kind of give realistic and practical advice and to try and be constructive as part of a team.
So you've obviously spent a great deal of your career in crisis mode, and like other sort of crisis PR people, you have sort of started to think, well, don't just bring us in during the crisis, bring us in preemptively. Let's build some sort of reputational sort of resilience, and of course it's wonderful to find those clients that have that sort of forward thinking approach. How much of your work is building resilience before the storm comes in, not like the day before, but sort of people who are out there thinking long term about and or does it only happen where somebody's gone through the storm and then they're like, okay, let's build some resilience for any future crisis? So how much of your work is preemptive?
More than it used to be. I think it's hard to kind of give a percentage on it, but I find that a mini crisis is very good for focusing attention. So often businesses have started a risk register, or they've got a protocol or some sort of playbook, but it's dusty and it's not well used. And then something will happen where it's tested and they think, actually, this isn't really fit for purpose. So increasingly, emerging companies, fast-growing businesses, particularly businesses that are taking on investment and they have new board members and they're operating in regulatory environments, regulated environments, or they're in new technologies or controversial industries or spaces. They are mindful of how they may be perceived and how their reputations may be damaged if they're not understood. So more and more businesses are coming to us in advance and saying, actually, can you look at what we have in place? And we're really good at tinkering and playing and improving. One of the things that is increasingly common actually is the desire to have some guidance in advance about how to properly investigate issues that arise, to make sure that businesses have thought through how they might quickly convene the SWAT team. I try to put military language out of these things. It's all very aggressive and very macho. But businesses are increasingly asking us to help to think about who they need and what those different concentric circles of information look like, and how they might set up and instigate a privileged investigation, because it's a common reputational strategy to say, oh, that looks very serious and damaging, so we'll properly investigate, and this is why it's independent. And but making sure that information is that those investigations are set up in a way that you can really get to the root of the issues and really consider who needs to know the warts and all and who gets what information is really important to kind of think through in advance, because those protocols aren't one size fits all. Every business is different. There are different skills and different roles in different businesses. And so actually, if you sit down in advance with C-suite, with communicators, with in-house lawyers, and work out in the specific example of this company, who would we need to be on that first call? Who needs to be on these WhatsApp groups or these Slack groups? And actually going through the processes, particularly to set up privileged investigations and those sorts of things, is really, really important, because you can only communicate and react if you know what is going on. And so often we will look at protocols with those kind of structures in mind.
So when I've been in multiple situations where there's a threat of a negative story that's coming out, and you often get a little email at 4 o'clock on a Friday, and of course, if that sort of prep work hasn't been done, then you've got 2 hours to figure out what's your approach to strategy, who should be in the room, what's the sort of what's the temperature of the crisis and so forth. And that's, I think, the biggest enemy in crisis is actually time, is that you need a very sort of, a short time to sort of do a turnaround. And often in times of great stress, you also, often sort of cognitive ability to sort of, wade through these issues tend to be impaired with, high levels of sort of, you're in sort of fight or flight mode. Now, what I quite liked about, the way that, reputational lawyers work is that, sometimes PR people want to write straight to the journalist about a piece and respond. And they don't want to bring in a lawyer at that stage because it sort of feels like it's dialing it up. And I think that's one of the wonderful ways that lawyers do work with PRs, where it doesn't have to just be, right, PR person, move out the way. Let's just, write a letter, to, straight to the editor. But actually, it's giving the PR people the tools and, and the sort of legal understanding and the nuance of what they can put in their own communications when they're liaising with the journalist. So it's a much more sort of like it's not sort of reputation. It's not bridge burning, but actually more informed negotiation between the PR and the journalist. And I imagine you do quite a lot of that as well.
I think it's always nuance. You've always got to respond to the issue at hand. There's no one size fits all in these situations. I think the important thing is always to try and keep as many different dialogues open as possible. And also to try and regain some control and not just be reactive. Very rarely are stories genuinely as urgent as a journalist might relay them. Of course, they want the scoop, and of course, they want to get things out. But I don't think you have to always react to that pressure. And sometimes it's appropriate to keep the communication just between PR and journalists, and sometimes it helps to have a letter that goes into the editor to say, this, you're going to get proper responses, but for all these reasons, this time frame is too narrow. I think it's about trying to give yourself enough time to think calmly and clearly. And, of course, the more you've done in advance, the more confident you can be that you've got the right information and that you have time to finesse it and present it. And, most good journalists appreciate that their work is improved by having a proper response. You might not have a very good answer, and actually, if they get the response, they'll be able to report on it. And so I think that it's important to try and keep the relationships as kind of as friendly as possible at that level. And we are often expected and required to be the bad cop to PR's good cop, which is fine, and we're used to that role. So I think it's about thinking about taking the temperature of knowing we have as PR do also quite a good idea of the competing demands and the different personalities. So there are certain titles that are quick to publish and sometimes quick to apologise, and others that take their time, and others who have different policies around double sourcing. So I think it's about trying to react to a particular crisis in a bespoke way, but also trying not to allow yourself to be pressured, and also not allowing yourself to be precious. I am not precious about our letterhead or about my drafting going with my name on it. Sometimes it's appropriate and in the client's best interest for the language that we draft between lawyers and PR to be expressed through the PR. So because it doesn't up the ante. We know that our letterhead can cause people to get a bit sweaty, and also to be taken to a different level within an organisation. So sometimes that works, sometimes that's helpful, and sometimes that's not. I think it's about being agile and responsive, and trying not to have that kind of one size fits all cookie cutter approach.
And for instance, if there's a negative piece that's about to come out or has come out about a client, and if there is sort of factual inaccuracies, that's something that one can handle and sort of point out gaps between the facts and what was reported. But what about sort of other tools in your sort of toolkit, like the right to be forgotten? For those who aren't familiar with the concept, could you share, what else is there that's available when there is a negative piece? And what rights do some clients have other than just the straightforward, it's factual or not?
The right to be forgotten is a data protection principle that means that data controllers are required and requested to stop processing personal data that is obsolete or out of date or inaccurate. And so often times clients haven't been particularly bothered or motivated to challenge reporting either internationally or because it wasn't affecting them for a period of time, and then suddenly banks change their risk appetite and it becomes a problem, or historic reporting starts getting amplified in different places and they think actually it's now something that is of concern. So where you have historic reporting that is inaccurate and contains personal data, there's an opportunity either to go to the original publisher and say, it's wrong and we're out of time in terms of defamation, but you might want to take it down because you have your own standards of accuracy, or to go to the data controller in the middle, so often the search engine or the host of a website, to ask the articles to be taken down, delinked, so they stay online. It's like removing the library card from the library. The book's still there, but it's more difficult to find. So that's one tool. But often media scrutiny doesn't just come in the guise of inaccurate reporting. Sometimes the volume of stories or the behaviour of journalists is oppressive, or could constitute harassment. And often we're called to advise individuals in relation to private information or confidential information that others are seeking to exploit. So we do a lot of work around blackmail, extortion attempts. So often high-profile individuals have managed to make great success in their careers because of their powerful personalities, but they've made enemies along the way, or they've done things in their private lives which others would seek to exploit. And so there's a lot of work around trying to keep private information private and not allowing individuals to try and to seek an advantage from its publication. So that's where you get into the kind of sphere of injunctions for threatened misuse of private information or harassment by a course of conduct, that sort of thing. So there's lots of different options.
And I imagine, if you're dealing with sort of top tier media houses, you obviously get responses and you could, sort of work quite effectively with them. What about if the negative piece is on some obscure anonymous blog or on Twitter and you don't even have the name of the person? The anonymous blog is based, I don't know, somewhere in Siberia. What happens then?
Well, there's a lot of time and energy spent often trying to work out who's behind publications. And it is possible in certain situations to go to the court to ask them to disclose, to force innocent people who've become embroiled in the wrongdoing of others to provide disclosure. So we've gone to ISPs or to mobile phone providers to say, we know that somebody is using this ISP to this IP address to post this information, or that they've registered this website, and can you disclose who they are? So there are ways and means of seeking legal. Your dog has come in again, which is very cute. I wonder if they have a view on this. So there are lots of different ways that we can try and get to behind publications online. And actually sometimes I think it's really important to encourage brands and individuals to reflect on credibility. So where there are defamatory allegations on obscure blogs, they can be damaging, but they're not as damaging as if it's published by the BBC. Yeah. And so sometimes it is a matter of trying to weigh up the time and energy that could be spent tracking down an anonymous poster, and actually whether the same time and energy could be spent on more positive PR with more credible publishers. But we have seen a rise actually in campaigns of disinformation, and they tend to be the same information spread on lots of blogs that are difficult to track down, difficult to engage with, and you have to deploy the skills of our cyber team, our digital forensics team, to try and work out, because humans are fallible, which makes them fantastically interesting. But even very carefully orchestrated campaigns can be flawed, and so we have quite a lot of experience of trying to look behind these campaigns, see if there have been fingerprints left, see if we can able to find those who are behind these sorts of these campaigns, and address them direct. I don't like picking fights with unknown quantities. I'm always very keen to know my enemy and know who we're up against and what their agenda is. So there's quite a lot of investigative work sometimes early on, trying to work out who's behind a cause of action and what they want to achieve.
Yeah, because I imagine it can be sometimes sort of smoke and mirrors. Now, it sounds obviously fascinating and complex, and you do workshops with PR agencies so that it's not just working with PRs in the eye of the storm, it's actually working with their teams. What do you cover in these workshops? I imagine it's focusing on pre and post publication advice and injunctions. But yeah, just for our listeners who want to know more about the actual workshops that you have been running with other agencies over the years.
They're always kind of creative, bespoke. What we tend to focus on is a little bit of an overview of media law, so the highlights of defamation and the defences that journalists would seek to rely on. So what should be happening at an editorial and journalistic level in order to put the story together, and going through the legal principles and the tests that have to be applied, so that you can see what the working, and so that you can help PR to poke on the sensitive bits. So talking about urgency, talking about tone, talking about sourcing. We do a bit of, look at defamation law principles like the public interest test, which is, does the story seek to speak to and inform a matter of genuine public importance and debate? So looking at examples of what is considered in the public interest and what is not. Also things around aspects of privacy law. So there is a very kind of evolving definition of what is private, what constitutes, what gives rise to a real expectation of privacy, people who are in the public domain, operating in public, when do they have an expectation of privacy and not. So we do a bit of law, which we really enjoy, and I think delegates enjoy too. But we also talk quite a lot about how to work with us. So when to bring us in, when to publicly show that we're working, but also the sorts of ways that we can work collaboratively pre-publication, rather than just just before, but kind of when we're looking at horizon swapping. I'm a big fan of trying to spot the problems and solve them before anyone notices them. So one of the things we try to achieve through actually the relationships that PR develop with brands and with businesses is you have that collaborative, long-term relationship, and you have the more frequent opportunities to ask the questions about what people are worried about. So how to help you exploit those opportunities to suggest that actually they might want to think about how whistleblowing operates, or how they receive information from the business that they might want to act on. So it's about ways of opening conversations that can create space for reputational challenges to be discussed and addressed ahead of time, because it's much better to plug the holes than just know where they are and worry about them.
And in your workshops, do you also cover the ascent of AI and the risks to defamation through the ChatGPT? A lot of people are, funny enough, relying upon ChatGPT and not doing the sort of source checking, and obviously with media houses and their budgets being cut because of the decline in advertising, moving over to social and retail marketing, and I think that's quite a concern for PRs, is journalists sort of getting their information from ChatGPT and not having that full team that they used to for fact checking.
I think you're right. It's a real risk, and so we talk about that as an issue, and encouraging PR to really push on journalists about where they're getting their information from and how they're sourcing things, because the onus is always going to be on the publisher, on the author, to be comfortable that they have done their research, and if they're relying on unknown sources online, they may not have discharged their duty, or they may not be able to verify and stand by it. So I think it's really important to try and make people really think about their sourcing, and make journalists really consider the risk appetite they have. So yes, we have these conversations. We also are privileged enough to have kind of developed relationships with agencies that are at the forefront of developing their own proprietary technology to look at how AI is going to continue to develop, and how it will impact how search is received, and how reputation management will develop over the next couple of years. So we ask them questions constantly, and so when we're thinking about strategy and building responses, we may kind of try and bring some of these agencies in, to try and use some of their expertise and help to future-proof reactions and planning, so that we're not having to kind of amend them or tweak them as things develop.
That's brilliant. So in terms of communicators, it could be past or present. It could even be you, if you wanted to, self-congratulate yourself. Who would you say is the communicator that you admire the most? They don't have to be PR people. They could be anything, politicians, but somebody who has, that has demonstrated the power of communications.
I'm going to go for someone like Taylor Swift. She is a massively talented woman who writes her own music, but also is unapologetic in her views. I think women are often conditioned not to antagonize or not to speak up. And I am very impressed by someone so young who's willing to use her voice and her influence to encourage people to vote and to speak up on issues of social justice and to be an ally. And I'm sure that, she's probably rich enough for it not to be a huge concern to her, but there is a commercial disincentive for anyone in her position to do that. And I am always very impressed by communicators who have integrity and are willing to kind of speak up for what they believe in. So I'm going for Taylor Swift.
I love that answer. I'm a fellow Swiftie, so is my daughter. Love
Excellent.
Her. Absolutely love her. What career advice would you give to your younger self, Emma?
I think I would tell myself to quieten the noise, to stop listening to that inner voice of doubt. And I think I believed that all of straight, white, privileged men had answers or knew things because they said things with conviction. Whereas I had in my mind, but what if this is not right? And I had a lot of self-doubt and a lot of back chat. And actually, if you quieten that down and just think about the issue at hand, and how you can influence, there's a lot more space. So I don't think that I've realised now that others don't have answers to these unforeseen and tricky issues. They've just got more confidence to project an answer.
Yeah.
So I've learned that actually, if you quieten the noise and just think about the issues at hand,
yeah,
and tell that kind of anxious Nelly, it's fine, and just kind of get on with it. Actually, if you trust your judgment and your instincts, it's probably right most of the time.
Absolutely. And how do you stay sane? mental health, well-being hacks for our audience?
I think taking time, letting yourself settle. I think if you're splashing around at the top of the pool, you can't see through things because there's too much kind of interruption and interference. So it's about creating space. I have redefined an early night as a reverse lie-in. Mm-hmm. I no longer have the opportunity to lay in bed and relax at weekends because I gave birth to very early starters, so early risers. So what I do now is I put myself to bed really early, and rather than feeling resentful that I'm missing out on adult time, I indulge. It feels like a kind of wonderful self-indulgence to kind of get into bed early and feel like I've kind of gained some time for myself to listen to podcasts or to write or read. And so I've reworked that in my mind. I also make sure that I try and give myself time to switch track. Mm-hmm. Often when I'm juggling or I'm working on different client matters, there's a temptation to put meetings back to back, as I have today, which I failed today. But I try really hard to create, even if it's 5-10 minute gaps between meetings, and to put them in my diary as TFM, time for me. Yeah. It's that kind of switching lanes, switching gear. And it means that you're not frantically trying to find the right documents, but also that you've kind of thought through before you walk in. It's a lot easier to project confidence when you feel it, and just having time to kind of pause and breathe in between really helps.
Absolutely. And for listeners who want to reach out to Emma, would it be website, LinkedIn?
All those things. My contact details are on the Mishcon website. I'm on LinkedIn. But
fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Emma, for such a fascinating conversation and sharing your journey with our community. And thank you, listeners. You'll find this episode on the PRCA's YouTube channel, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, alongside other episodes interviewed by my co-host Dan Gold and myself. If you'd like what you hear, please do share so we can grow our community. If you have any feedback or topics you'd like us to cover, please do contact us. We publish interviews every 2 weeks, so stay tuned as we have some inspiring stories in the pipeline.